In 1980, a novel was published that would go on to win the Pulitzer Prize, one of the funniest books ever written by an American. Its author never saw it in print. He had been dead for 11 years by his own hand, certain that the book was a failure. His name was John Kennedy Toole. The book was A Confederacy of Dunces, a sprawling, uproarious comic novel about New Orleans and its misfits. It exists today only because one person on Earth refused to accept that it was worthless: his mother. This is a story with two obsessions in it, not one. A young man's obsession with getting a single book exactly right, and after his death, his mother's obsession with making sure the world eventually read it anyway. John Kennedy Toole was born on December 17, 1937 in New Orleans, the only child of parents already in their late 30s. From the start, he was extraordinary. He read early, wrote early, and excelled at nearly everything he tried. His mother, Thelma, a former teacher of elocution, cultivated his talent relentlessly from the beginning. By age 10, she had him performing comic impressions on local stages. She believed completely and without doubt that her son was a genius. She was right, and that certainty would shape both of their lives. He excelled at school so completely that he graduated high school at 16. That same year, 1954, he wrote his first novel, The Neon Bible. He later dismissed it as adolescent work. It would not see print in his lifetime either. He went on to Tulane University, graduating with honors in 1958, and then to Columbia University in New York on a prestigious fellowship, determined to finish a master's degree in English literature in a single year, which he did. He taught, and taught well, first at Hunter College in New York, then back home at the University of Southwestern Louisiana. Students and colleagues, by every account, found him charming, funny, and sharply observant. He noticed people. That gift would become the engine of everything he wrote. In 1961, still pursuing a doctorate at Columbia, he was drafted into the United States Army. He was sent to Fort Buchanan, Puerto Rico, to teach English to Spanish-speaking recruits. An unglamorous assignment, far from any battlefield. It was here, of all places, that he began the book that would define his life. In his off hours, in a small private office, he started typing the story of Ignatius J. Reilly, a gluttonous, brilliant, furious failure of a man loose in the streets of New Orleans. Colleagues later remembered him growing quieter during this period, spending more and more time behind that office door, increasingly absorbed in the world he was building on the page. Some said he began to talk and even act, a little like his own creation. Ignatius J. Reilly was, in part, drawn from a real friend and colleague back home. But by most accounts, he was also drawn from Toole himself, an alienated, brilliant mind, deeply out of step with the modern world around him. In 1963, financial trouble and his father's declining health brought him back to New Orleans for good. He moved into his parents' home, took a teaching post at St. Mary's Dominican College, and kept working on the manuscript in every spare hour he had. By the following year, the novel was finished. Toole believed with real conviction that he had written something singular, a comic epic of his own city, populated by the loafers, hustlers, and eccentrics he had spent a lifetime quietly observing. In February of 1964, Toole submitted the manuscript to Simon & Schuster, one of the most respected publishing houses in New York. It landed on the desk of a promising young editor named Robert Gottlieb, who would go on to shape the careers of some of the century's great writers. Gottlieb read it and saw real talent immediately. He also saw problems, structural, tonal, problems he believed could be fixed. He wrote back with encouragement and with a request: revise it. Toole, hopeful, agreed. For nearly a year, the two of them went back and forth, Gottlieb sending notes, Toole sending revisions, each round bringing the book slightly closer to what Gottlieb wanted, and by some accounts, slightly further from what Toole had originally meant it to be. In December of 1964, Gottlieb finally wrote the letter Toole had been dreading. Even with all its revisions, he said, the book still didn't quite add up to anything. It was brilliant in pieces. As a whole, in Gottlieb's judgment, it wasn't yet a novel that meant something. In January of 1965, Toole wrote back. There was nothing more he could sensibly do to the book, he said. He'd rather have the manuscript returned than keep chasing a version of it that might still not satisfy anyone. It reads, in hindsight, like a door quietly closing. His mother, never one to let a setback stand unchallenged, pushed him to try one more avenue, a personal connection to Hodding Carter Jr., a respected Louisiana writer and publisher then teaching at Tulane in their own city. Toole agreed reluctantly and brought the manuscript to Carter himself. Carter was kind about it, but he had no real interest in taking it further. For Toole, this rejection landed differently than the first. This one had happened close to home, in person, with no distance to soften it. By most accounts, Toole partly blamed his mother for the humiliation of that meeting, for pushing him into a rejection he might otherwise have avoided entirely. It was a small crack in a relationship that had, until then, been almost entirely devoted and admiring. After Carter's rejection, Toole made a decision that would prove far more consequential than anyone around him understood at the time. He shelved the novel completely, not for a season, for good as far as he was concerned. He kept teaching. He remained, by most accounts, a popular and engaging professor for a while longer. But something in him had changed. The book that had absorbed his best energy for years now sat untouched, a closed subject in a house that had once revolved around it. The late 1960s brought a string of harder years. Toole's father's health continued to decline, money was tight, and Toole himself, by the accounts of those closest to him, grew increasingly withdrawn, anxious, and prone to dark, persecuted moods that hadn't been part of his character before. He began drinking more. His teaching, once a source of real pride, grew erratic. By some accounts, unpredictable enough to concern his colleagues. Eventually, he resigned from his position at Dominican College altogether. Those who knew him in this period describe a man convinced, increasingly and irrationally, that people were working against him. Colleagues, publishers, even at times his own family. Whatever the underlying cause, the change was real, and it was getting worse. And through all of it, the manuscript stayed exactly where he'd left it. On top of that armoire, in his childhood bedroom, gathering dust in a house he still lived in, a masterpiece he had personally decided was a failure. It is worth pausing on this. The book that would one day win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction sat, unread by anyone new, in a bedroom in New Orleans, while the man who wrote it quietly came apart just a few rooms away. In early 1969, after what family members later described as a serious fight with his mother, Toole withdrew a sum of money from his bank account and left New Orleans. He did not say clearly where he was going or when he intended to come back. What followed was roughly 2 months on the road, a long, aimless-seeming journey that eventually took him as far as California, before he began, it seems, making his way back home. No one close to him fully understood, at the time or since, exactly what he was looking for on that trip, or what he was trying to leave behind. What's clear is that the rejection of his novel weighed on him far more heavily than he ever let anyone see. By most accounts, this was not simply a case of an author sulking over a bad review. Those who study his life describe a man in the grip of a serious mental health crisis, one that had been building for years and that the novel's rejection had sharpened rather than caused. It's worth being honest about what this story actually is, rather than the simpler version that gets repeated. It is not just the story of a rejected manuscript, it is the story of a brilliant, unwell young man whose illness and whose creative devastation arrived, tragically, at the same time. By late March of 1969, he was in Biloxi, Mississippi, a coastal town not far from the Louisiana state line. Close enough, it seems, that he may have been on his way back to New Orleans at last. On March 26, 1969, John Kennedy Toole was found dead in his car near Biloxi. He had taken his own life. He was 31 years old. He left a letter for his parents, its contents known to this day, only to his mother, who destroyed it. His funeral was small and private, attended only by his parents and Beulah Matthews, the woman who had helped raise him as a child. At the college where he'd taught, students and colleagues held their own memorial in a courtyard, grieving a man many of them hadn't known was struggling at all. For 2 years afterward, by most accounts, his mother Thelma fell into a deep depression of her own. The manuscript remained exactly where it had been for years, on top of the armoire in her son's old room, untouched, unread by anyone new, presumed by nearly everyone to be worthless. It would have been entirely understandable if the story had ended there. A talented young man, dead too young. A manuscript nobody wanted, gathering dust in a house heavy with grief. Most stories like this one do end exactly there. This one didn't. because sometime in 1971, Thelma Toole climbed up, took the manuscript down from that armoire, and began reading her son's novel again. This time, not as a proud mother, but as a woman with absolutely nothing left to lose by fighting for it. She was certain the book was good. She had believed in her son's talent his entire life, and she was not about to stop now that he was no longer here to believe in it himself. She began sending the manuscript out, publisher after publisher, in his name. The rejections kept coming. By some counts, at least 7 publishers turned the book down during this period. The same fundamental judgment Gottlieb and Carter had made years earlier echoed back at her again and again from strangers who had never known her son at all. Most people, after 7 rejections and a decade of grief, would have stopped. Thelma Toole did not stop. If anything, each rejection seemed to sharpen her resolve rather than dull it. She had already lost her son. She was not going to lose his book too. In the mid-1970s, she learned that a respected novelist, Walker Percy, was teaching creative writing at Loyola University, right there in New Orleans. She decided he would be the one to finally read her son's book, whether he wanted to or not. Percy, understandably, was reluctant. He had no shortage of unpublished manuscripts pressed on him by hopeful relatives of aspiring writers, and this one, a worn carbon copy carried in a shopping bag by an insistent, unfamiliar older woman, did not at first seem any different. But Thelma did not leave. She called, she wrote. She returned to his office, by some accounts again and again, until simply reading the manuscript became easier than continuing to refuse her. Percy finally agreed to take it home. He began reading, expecting very little. Over the following months, his expectations changed completely. He later described the experience as reading a gargantuan, tumultuous, human tragicomedy, and realized with real astonishment that the book Toole had believed was a failure was, in fact, something close to a masterpiece. With Percy's support, the manuscript reached Louisiana State University Press, a respected academic publisher, but one that rarely, if ever, published fiction. In 1980, they took a chance on it anyway, printing a modest first run of 2,500 copies. The book's title came from a line by Jonathan Swift. When a true genius appears in the world, you may know him by this sign, that the dunces are all in confederacy against him. It was less a war reference than a very old joke about being surrounded by people who don't understand you. Reviews were almost immediately ecstatic. Readers who discovered the book fell for it hard and fast, passing it to friends, insisting they read it too. What had been rejected as a book about nothing turned out, to an enormous number of people, to be about almost everything. In 1981, John Kennedy Toole was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. He remains, to this day, one of the very few writers ever to receive that honor after their own death, a distinction that exists only because his mother refused, for over a decade, to accept the word no. Thelma Toole became, in the years that followed, an unlikely public figure. A flamboyant, fierce champion of her son's memory and his book, giving interviews, attending events, making sure the world understood exactly what her decade of refusal had accomplished. She died in 1984, having lived just long enough to see her son become exactly what she had always insisted he was. A genius, recognized at last, on the largest stage American literature has to offer. The novel has since sold well over 1.5 million copies, been translated into dozens of languages, and become a permanent fixture of American comic fiction. A bronze statue of Ignatius J. Reilly himself now stands on a New Orleans street corner, greeting passers-by who mostly have no idea what it cost to put him there. So we're left with a story built on a brutal piece of timing. 11 years separate the manuscript's rejection from its acceptance. 11 years separate a young man's certainty that he had failed from the world's certainty that he hadn't. He was alive for none of it. It is tempting to ask the obvious, cruel question. What if Gottlieb had simply said yes in 1964? What if Hodding Carter had taken the manuscript seriously? Would a young man who was already struggling in ways far deeper than one rejected book still have found his way to that car in Biloxi? No one can honestly answer that. His illness, by every account of those who knew him, ran deeper than any single professional setback. The rejection was real, and it mattered to him enormously. But it was very likely a wound layered onto an already struggling mind, not the sole cause of what followed. What we can say for certain is this: the book he believed was worthless was not worthless. The judgment he trusted least, his own in his final years, turned out to be the one thing about this entire story that was wrong. And what we can also say for certain is that his mother's obsession, her refusal for over a decade to accept 7 rejections as the final word, is the only reason any of us have ever gotten to read it at all. This series usually asks why a person gives everything to a private obsession no one else understands. Here, that question has 2 answers, not one. A son's obsessive devotion to getting a book exactly right, and a mother's equally obsessive devotion to proving he already had. Neither obsession, on its own, would have been enough. If Toole had lived, the book might well have found its way into print through ordinary means, in ordinary time. If his mother had simply grieved quietly, the manuscript might have stayed on that armoire forever. It took both, a young man's genuine talent and a grieving mother's refusal to let that talent be buried along with him. One obsession created the book, the other made sure it survived to be read. There is something almost unbearable in knowing that the affirmation he needed most, proof that the book was good, that he hadn't wasted years of his life on nothing, existed the entire time in the very pages he'd stopped believing in and simply arrived too late to reach him. Readers today laugh their way through Ignatius J. Reilly's misadventures with little sense of any of this. The rejection, the decade of grief, the mother with the shopping bag, the parked car in Biloxi. The comedy stands entirely on its own. The cost behind it does too. Perhaps that's the strange comfort in the second half of this story. Talent, once it's real, doesn't actually disappear just because its creator couldn't see it clearly in his own darkest years. Sometimes it just waits, on top of an armoire, in a shopping bag, for someone else to refuse to give up on it. But the harder truth sits right alongside that comfort, and this story doesn't let you have one without the other. He never knew. Whatever certainty and joy the Pulitzer and the readers and the statue on the street corner might have given him, he was not there to receive any of it. So the unanswerable why in this episode splits into 2 separate, equally difficult questions. Why does talent this real go unrecognized by the very people equipped to recognize it for over a decade, until it's too late to matter to the person who made it? And the second question, gentler but just as hard to answer, why does it sometimes take losing someone completely, no more chances left, nothing more to lose, before the people around them are finally willing to fight for what they always secretly believed about them? Neither question has a comfortable answer. But the book exists. Millions of people have read it, laughed at it, loved it, exactly as its author always privately hoped they might, even after he'd convinced himself otherwise. That much, at least, this story got right in the end. Like Toole himself, none of us can ever fully know from the outside whether our own harshest private judgments about our own work, or ourselves, are actually true, or whether they're simply the loudest voice in a room that badly needs another opinion. Thelma Toole is buried near her son in Greenwood Cemetery in New Orleans. On the anniversary of the book's publication each year, readers still leave copies, notes, and small tributes at the statue of Ignatius on Canal Street. A strange, specific kind of pilgrimage for a novel about a man who never once set out to be a symbol. In the end, the dunces of the title were never really the villains of this story. Not Gottlieb, who genuinely tried, not Carter, who was simply not the right reader, not even Toole himself, whose harshest critic in the end turned out to be his own exhausted mind. The real subject of this story was never rejection, or genius, or even grief exactly. It was persistence. One woman's decade-long refusal to let a closed drawer, a dusty armoire, and 7 rejection letters be the final word on her son's one extraordinary book. So we're left once more with the question and not a clean answer. Not why he doubted himself. Most of us, in our darkest years, doubt ourselves too. The harder question is why it so often takes someone else, refusing to give up on us long after we've given up on ourselves, to prove that the doubt was wrong all along.